Alright, so up until now, we were dealing with the Git repository on our local machine. All the commits and the amends that we made were on our system. We never really needed the internet because it was just one person contributing to the repository. In the real world, collaboration is key, and to collaborate, you need others to have access to your code. This is where remote repositories come in, and as discussed, we'll be working with a remote repository called Github. This remote repository that I'm talking about is literally the same repository that you have on your local machine. It's just that it will be hosted on the internet so that others could push or pull code to make changes to the project. Now, the two most crucial actions when working with the remote repository will either be to push code from local to remote or to pull code from remote to local. So every action that we saw up until now remains the same. You make changes, you stage those changes, and then you commit them to your local repository. Now you'll also have to push this code to the remote repository. So this is the new step that gets added to the flow. The second use case that comes with remote repositories is when you want to fetch someone else's changes into your local repository. Like for instance, let's say you are new to an organization and you want to get the project files that you'll be working on in your local machine. It's hosted on GitHub, so you'll have to create a copy of that project in your machine. This action specifically is called cloning a repository. So you're basically pulling code from a remote server into your machine by cloning it. After a couple of weeks, you are now familiar with the code and ready to work on a feature. But in these couple of weeks, other engineers might have pushed some code in the remote repository. You'll need to get those changes into your local machine, which again is an instance of you pulling code. Let's actually see how we can achieve all of this. Since we have only been working on a local repo up until now, we'll need to create a remote repository from scratch. It's pretty straightforward, so let's actually open up GitHub. Make sure you're logged into your account. If you want to know how to create a GitHub account, you can watch the first video of this series. At the top right corner, you'll see a plus icon here. If you click on this plus icon, you'll see an option to create a new repository. Click on it and you'll be redirected to this particular page. It will first ask you for the repository name. So add whatever name you like. We'll call it Git Demo. You can also attach a description for this project, but it's completely optional. You can choose to keep this repository public or private. For now, we'll keep it as public. We can change it at any given point in the future. You also get an option to add a README file for this repository. README files normally give you a brief introduction of the project inside the repository. Sometimes you'll also find the documentation related to the project in these README files. You can create it at any point manually, so let's keep it for now. You also get an option to add a gitignore file, which we've already done in our local repository, so let's just skip this for now. Finally, you get an option to attach a license to your project. There are different licenses that allow or restrict users to use this repository in a certain manner. Since this is just going to be a dummy project, we'll go with the default option, which is set to none. And that's it. Our remote repository is now ready. Now all we need to do is push our code from the local repository to this remote repository. To do that, GitHub provides us with a set of steps. Now since we already have a Git repository in our local machine, we don't need to run all these commands here. Instead, we'll go with these commands. This first command right here creates a new remote called origin and links the Git repository that we have in our local machine to this remote URL. You can also have a name here instead of origin, but it is a standard practice to use origin as the remote name, so we'll go with that for now. We will be creating multiple origins in the future, so yeah, let's keep it as it is for now. The second command renames the master branch to main. This again is an industry standard these days and it's good if we comply with it, so we'll do that. But this again is not a mandatory step. Also, since we are in an early stage where we don't have any other configurations or pipelines built on top of this repository, it's okay to rename this root branch. But if your project is relatively old and has a bunch of dependencies, then renaming the root branch is not recommended. Even if you have to, you should take multiple steps into consideration to mitigate risks. The last command here will push our code to the GitHub repository. The U flag that you see over here basically links the local main branch to the remote main branch. So whenever you're trying to pull code from the remote to your local machine, you simply can type in git pull without specifying the remote name or the branch name. If you would have skipped this U flag while pushing the code to the main branch, the next time when you're trying to pull changes from the main branch, you would have to specify the name of the branch as well. So this flag basically links your local repository's main branch to the remote repository's main branch. So whenever you have to pull any new changes in the main branch from the remote repository, you can do it directly without specifying the name of the branch. So let's actually open the terminal and run these 3 commands. And with that, we have pushed our local repository code inside GitHub. If I go back to GitHub and reload this page, you'll be able to see the code that we have in our local repository. The same files that we have over here is what's inside this GitHub repository. You'll also notice that there are no node modules here. We have it in our local repository, but we don't have it here. That's because we ignored the folder inside our gitignore file. So if we take a look inside this file, you can see that node modules are ignored. So since Git doesn't keep track of the node modules folder, it's never going to be part of the local Git repository, and hence it will never get pushed to the remote repository. Let's also add a readme file now. So I'll just click on this button here and we'll just simply add a title, dummy readme text. When you save this readme file, you can see here that the name of the button is commit new file. This means that it actually commits it to the repository just like we did with any other file locally. So I'll click on this button. Now this one change has put our GitHub repository 1 commit ahead of our local repository. Our local repository is not aware of this new readme file. So over here, even if I refresh the files, it's still not going to have the readme file that we just created in the GitHub repository. So to pull this file in our local, we need to first use the git fetch command. Git fetch. But what about the git pull command that we saw earlier? Let's actually look at the differences between git pull and git fetch. When downloading content from a remote repository, you can either use git pull or git fetch. You can consider git fetch as the safe version of the 2 commands. It will download the remote content but not update your local repository's working state, leaving your current work intact. Git pull is the more aggressive alternative. It will download the remote content for the active local branch and immediately execute git merge. So it will create a new commit, which is called the merge commit for the new remote content. If you have any pending changes in progress, it will also kick off a merge conflict resolution flow. So a git fetch command downloads commits, files, and references from a remote repository into your local repository. Fetching is what you do when you want to see what everybody else has been working on. So as you can see here, we have used the git fetch command, but you cannot see the readme file in the files list. Now when we run the git pull command, you'll notice that the readme file is now present in this list. And it has the same dummy text that we had added in the GitHub repository. So it actually updated our working directory, unlike the fetch command. If I open up the logs, you'll be able to see the new commit entry that we had created on GitHub. So now essentially our local and remote repositories are on the same level. Alright, so that is it for this video. In the next video, we'll explore GitHub and different ways to interact with GitHub. So make sure you subscribe for that. And yeah, I'll see you in the next one.